Hi everybody, and welcome back to Lost Genre Relationships. How would you deal with an ex that simply cannot accept that you've moved on from them? Well, some people don't have it easy, like our next OP. This one is from Crush Survivor 123. Discovered my wife's, now ex, affair the day she was admitted into hospital. Now years later, she can't accept my engagement to my fiancé. If there was ever a prize for the most horrible way to learn of your significant other's affair, I would probably win it and be in its Hall of Fame. Like so many people in this sub, I suddenly found myself as a member of a club that nobody ever wants to be part of. I will never forget the sound of my ex-sister-in-law's voice as she kept saying, I'm sorry, over and over on the phone while I drove home from a week-long business trip. I was confused and had absolutely no idea what she meant, but only after I managed to calm her down somewhat did she inform me that my wife was in the hospital and that I need to hurry home. My mind went into overdrive as I tried to get more information as well as not crash while I began speeding to get there faster. The only thing she told me is that it was an assault, then cut the call and wouldn't answer when I tried to call her again. A bit of background. My ex and I met in our mid-20s. It was through a mutual friend at a barbecue. At first, she seemed almost too good to be true. Not only was she incredibly beautiful, but she was also shy and introverted. It took a while for us to officially date, but once it happened, I was over the moon. When we first tried to get intimate, she suddenly started crying. Should have taken this as a bad sign. I freaked out and thought it was something I did, but she apologized the next day and told me she was triggered. As it turns out, 2 years before meeting me, she was in a long-term relationship with a guy that was abusive, both emotionally, physically, as well as mentally. He would degrade her during their moments of intimacy, then apologize afterward. She had a flashback but reassured me that it had nothing to do with me, so we took things slow as she was still in therapy. It was tough, but because I loved her, I believed once we got over this, it would make our relationship stronger, and for a while, it honestly appeared that way. Fast forward another year and we'd gotten engaged. First time intimacy also happened during this stage. I was fortunate enough to be able to buy a house for us, courtesy of inheritance from my late uncle. Things were going great, and I half seriously suggested we plant a peach tree, important for later on, to signify new beginnings, and she was all for it. We were wedded not long after that, and quite frankly, it was absolutely amazing. Of course, we had our normal ups and downs like every married couple, but I considered us more lucky because she always made it a point to never go to bed upset with each other, and she would always point out gently if I did anything to upset her. Sometime later, life basically happened and I was promoted at my job. It meant more pay, but it also meant I would be traveling more for work conferences and business meetings. I noticed she had been getting down a lot more and wasn't being as intimate as before. She would keep her phone close to her and even stopped gently addressing things that upset her. I tried to talk to her about it, but she assured me that she was fine and this was a phase she was going through, and having no reason to not trust her, I let it go. She would sometimes go to her sister's place and spend the night telling me she just needed a bit of girl time with her sister. The day I got that fateful phone call was the day she was meant to be keeping her sister company again. I remember rushing into the hospital, barely breathing and frantically asking about my wife, when the world's most understanding and patient police officer sat me down to explain what happened. He told me he was a friend of my sister-in-law and he happened to respond to a domestic disturbance call. He arrived on the scene to find a couple fighting. The supposed boyfriend was on top of the female, punching her, and she was screaming, trying to scratch him. This didn't make any sense to me because, 1, this had nothing to do with my wife because we're married, and 2, literally everyone who knew my wife knew she wouldn't do that. He gave me a knowing look and placed his hand on my shoulder, then told me to be very calm because said girlfriend was actually my wife. If it weren't for the severity of the situation, I would have laughed in his face, but something in the way he said everything made me believe him. I then was ushered in by a nurse to see my wife, and what greeted me, to this day I still can hardly find the words to describe it. I just stood there for what seemed like an eternity. Then a doctor came in and explained her injuries to me. The jaw was slightly fractured. Her left eye was completely swollen shut and had massive bruising covering half of her face as well as 3 broken ribs. Then the doctor dropped another bomb and told me she was pregnant. I still couldn't understand how this happened, and then I caught sight of her sister. She at first tried to avoid me, but at the persuasion of her police officer friend, she told me what she knew. It turns out my wife's ex had gotten in contact with her 5 months ago. He was doing this redemption pyramid step thing where he would apologize to people he has wronged in order to clear his karma. Anyone else's BS meter going crazy right now? They began talking more, then he convinced her to meet up for coffee and show her he was a changed man. Obviously, old feelings resurfaced, coupled with the fact that he appeared changed. Now, it soon developed into an emotional affair. My wife approached her sister for advice, who told her to take things slow and just get it out of her system if she needed to, which then led to a physical affair 3 months later. She actually told my wife that she should at least make peace with her ex in whatever form it may be, and even offered to cover for my wife once in a while. My sister-in-law was in tears at this point and kept apologizing to me that she didn't know about the abuse as my wife never told anyone other than me and her therapist at the time about it. I was numb. I just couldn't feel anything and was absolutely dumbfounded by my wife's actions. When my wife finally woke up, I was there and she burst into tears upon seeing me. I spent the following months in zombie flight mode. There was individual counseling for her, as well as marriage counseling for us at the strong urging of her family. In counseling, she was surprisingly forthcoming about how it happened and how she absolutely hated herself for causing me pain. She mentioned how at one point on her way home from his place, she actually fantasized about driving into the river because she smelt like him and didn't want his scent to corrupt me. However, that made sense. She said she tried to end it, but was too weak, and only after learning that she was pregnant that it actually woke her up and made her realize that any further contact with this man was toxic to not only her, but the unborn child as well. Hence, went to end things in person for good when he snapped on her. She became a shell of herself and developed a phobia for any other males but me. At one point, she couldn't even use the bathroom at night unless I was holding her hand. Sad, right? After the baby was born, son by the way, we got a paternity test and he was mine. But the more time I spent with her, the more I realized I didn't hate my wife, I actually loathed her. I couldn't see the woman I married, but instead saw his leftovers each time I looked at her. I decided to leave because I was afraid I'd do something I'd regret and be exactly like her abusive ex. She begged me not to leave and even made the ridiculous offer of giving me a hall pass as well as slapping her if I wanted to. I knew at this point I had to get out. She was actually very generous during the divorce. She moved back into her parents and signed a very well thought out co-parenting plan issued by the courts. Moving forward 3 years later, and I meet my now fiancé by chance. I was in a bookstore with a buddy of mine and we were discussing Egyptian mythology when this beautiful woman approached me to correct me on my pronunciations of the Egyptian gods and cities. Needless to say, I was immensely impressed by not only her understanding, but also by the fact that she is Egyptian herself. We exchanged numbers, which eventually led us to dating. When I finally proposed to her, it was actually in front of the peach tree I had planted years ago. I got down on one knee, but before I got my answer, she ran into the house and then came out with a ring as well. Turns out, she was actually planning on proposing herself because she was madly in love with me and she didn't want any other woman to have me. My son, in all his sweet childlike innocence, told his mother what happened because he was present when it happened. My ex literally showed up that night in the rain yelling about how could I propose to her, my fiancé, in front of our tree and that this isn't the end of us. I am completely exhausted at this point. I cannot go no contact because she is the mother of my child, but she is basically harassing me and my fiancé. How do I convince her to move on, to get over her fear of men and not force me to get a restraining order? Sorry it was long, but I am really desperate. Edit. Wanted to ask a question to the insightful women of Reddit. Something that still bugs me to this day is the fact that my ex made time for her ex, who took pleasure in destroying her, only for her to suffer a much worse fate. Is it normal for the abused to want the attention of the abuser even if she might hate him? Something my ex said once. Edit 2. Forgot to add this in the original post. When my fiancé presented me with the ring which she was gonna use to propose to me, she had an engraving on the inner band which states, "To my pharaoh." Damn, I love this woman. Well, OP, the first thing I'm gonna say is, congratulations on the engagement. It seems like you found your soulmate. Regarding your ex, I think going no contact isn't what you want because yeah, she is the mother of your child, but you should definitely try to influence her going to therapy to get over this fear. Now, she is a victim, so that might take a lot of work. What do you guys think about this whole thing? Well, while you ponder that, let's move on with the update to see how this story ends. Wow, didn't expect this type of response. Thank you all so much for your support and kind words both for me, my fiancé, and my ex. It's sad that my situation with my ex and her abusive past isn't as uncommon as I thought. Reading some of your similar cases really makes one almost lose hope, but glad to see some people have recovered from them. A couple of things I forgot to add in the original post. Before the incident, my ex-sister-in-law was actually a militant feminist. Not that there's anything wrong with feminism, but she always had a tendency to take it to the extremes. After the divorce, she sat me down for coffee and profusely apologized for her role in the destruction of my marriage. She told me she knew how much this relationship meant to my ex, but didn't want to stunt her emotional growth or restrict her horizons, whatever the hell that means. She begged me not to give up on her sister, but I simply couldn't stay married. Since then, she has become the image of an 80s woman. She's no longer militant and is very reserved, the total opposite of who she was before. My wife's ex got sent to prison. Right after charges were filed, 2 more women came forward with reports about his abusive behavior. The really sad part is that both of these women were in long-term relationships, which ended horribly because of this guy. One was married and the other was engaged. Turns out, they had similar mental issues like my ex. Low self-esteem, self-hating and whatnot. The married one even got pregnant with his child, to which he promptly abandoned. Class act, right? They have both stated that it was their greatest misfortune meeting this man, and being involved with him felt like they were cursed. Even after they both ended things, it apparently changed their outlook on relationships and life as a whole, and not for the better. Now, for what has happened since my first post. Since my last post, my son's birthday was coming up, and he told us he wanted to have a camp night for it. Now, I must explain, the boy absolutely loves the outdoors. Everything from camping to hiking to even playing in rivers are his favorite. And obviously, due to the ongoing situation, we cannot go to our usual spots, so I offered my backyard for it. Another request he had was for my ex to sleep over as well. He wanted to imitate a scene from one of his kid adventure shows where both parents are sitting on either side of the child and all 3 are roasting marshmallows on the campfire. Now, I had absolutely no intention of denying my son's birthday wishes, but at the same time, I couldn't have my ex sleep in the same tent as me and my son. That would be too disrespectful to my fiancé. Even though she said she understood, it was clear she wasn't okay with it. My ex seemed to take advantage of this and kept saying how much she was looking forward to spending the night with her two men, and even went as far as to buy a whole lot of camping equipment that would put Bear Grylls to shame. She was certainly trying to rub it in my fiance's face, and wasn't graceful about it either. I had to tell her to stop a couple of times, but she only relented when I threatened to invite her sister. Ever since our divorce, my ex has had a burning hatred for her sister. She, my ex, acknowledges her role in the destruction of our marriage, but blames her sister for encouraging the affair and not safeguarding her from making choices that would ruin hers, but more importantly, according to her, our life together. It's gotten so bad that she refuses to let her sister spend any significant amount of time with our son, which at one point caused my ex-sister-in-law to have severe depression. For example, last year for Thanksgiving at her mom's place, I sometimes go for the sake of my son, mainly because he absolutely loves to see both of his parents celebrating stuff together with him. My ex exploded at her sister, calling her a parasite and the catalyst for her ruined life. Her sister has been trying for years to make amends, but it's often met with vile and vicious remarks. The relationship between my ex-sister-in-law and her parents was certainly estranged for a while, especially with her father, who is a former firefighter. He basically disowned her at first, but was convinced to forgive her, at least in part, by his wife, her mother. But it was never the same, and I think that was probably the main reason why she changed so much. My ex-sister-in-law has been trying for years to reconcile with her sister, but it just seems to get worse as time goes on. Now, to my debacle of sleeping in the same tent, a Redditor offered me a simple and effective solution. She suggested I go out and purchase a multi-roomed tent. That way, my fiancé could be included. I wasted no time and immediately went out to get one. Of course, my ex wasn't too happy about that, but was glad to be under the same roof as me. During the birthday celebration, my son was on cloud 9. He ran around the yard and pretended he was a great explorer discovering a new land. When evening came, I made the fire and my ex provided the marshmallows. He excitedly sat between us and started roasting his marshmallow alongside us. What I didn't expect was after we were done taking pictures and making s'mores, he handed my fiancée a stick and a marshmallow as well and sat next to her to make his second s'more. It's honestly a mystery how something this pure and perfect could come out of the absolute mess that was the relationship between me and my ex. My ex asked for a bit of time, to which I obliged. We stepped into the kitchen and she apologized for her behavior on the day that I proposed, but not for her actions following that. She told me she still sees me as her husband in her mind, so the thought of me giving my heart to another terrified her. She said she never wanted to cause me pain and would give anything to go back in time and undo her mistakes. She mentioned how happy she was when the paternity test showed that I was the father because she thought it was a new beginning for us and that he was proof of our love. Another thing is that she mentioned how she never wanted me to see the real her, the ugly her. She said that the day I saw her in the hospital was the day she truly felt like her insides finally matched her outsides, and she never wanted me to see her that way. Although she did get counseling, I doubt it was effective. Something I didn't mention in the original post is that during the mandatory mediation, she would oftentimes sneak into my bed at night and just cry while holding me from behind. She would also pick my suit for me during these times while trying to convince me to stay in the marriage. I hated that I felt so emasculated with her when she was clearly suffering, but felt I had to leave before my resentment turned me into a monster. Anyway, I thanked her for the courage to share all this, but told her I was happy with where I was in life and with whom I was with. I told her I hoped she would find someone to make her happy as well. She said she meant what she told me on the day we divorced and will wait for me. I left the kitchen feeling exhausted because none of what I was trying to say got through to her. We decided to call it a night where me and my fiance slept in one room of the tent and my ex with my son in another. All in all, a good birthday for my son, but not so good night for me. Well, OP, at least you're moving forward. You're engaged with a woman that truly loves you and your son likes her and wants to include her in his life. That's great! Regarding your ex, it's sad she can't move forward because she's definitely got issues. However, those issues are not your responsibility to solve. Your responsibility is to your son and to your fiance, while of course trying to keep a civil relationship with your ex. But then again, that's just my opinion. What about you guys? What do you guys think about this whole thing? And so we've reached the end of the video. I truly hope you guys liked it. If you did, go ahead and click like. Of course, don't forget to subscribe and click that bell icon so you get notified every time I upload a new video. Also, here are more videos from my channel that you might enjoy. And having said all that, I will see you guys on the next video.